Hello everyone. I would just like to start by thanking the British Cattle Breeders Conference for allowing me to speak today. My presentation is going to focus on heifer replacement strategies in the suckler herd. At the end of the day, heifers are the lifeblood of the suckler herd and a valuable source of new genetics. The way we develop our heifers has a huge impact on their lifetime reproductive performance, and therefore it's essential we get it right. The future of the UK suckler industry hangs in the balance. Profits within the sector are poor and have been for a number of years, with AHDB reporting that the average suckle herd is losing around £135 per cow before subsidies. And even the most progressive herds are still losing money. It really makes you question, how long can this continue? And what is the future for this wonderful industry? When we compare ourselves, using the graph on screen now, with other countries, you can see that, relatively speaking, our returns are on par with everyone else's, highlighted by the dark blue dot. However, it's our costs that really let us down, highlighted by the bars. And this is likely because in the UK, we generally have higher land values, and our climate means that we often have to house our cattle for long periods of time. Not only that, but we also have higher labour costs because of our relatively smaller herd sizes. However, this doesn't explain everything. The difference in costs can also be explained by inefficiencies in management practices and often low uptake of new technologies. One key management practice which has been demonstrated to reduce costs is calving heifers for the first time at 2 years of age. Calving at 2 has been commonplace in the US, Canada, Australia for many, many years, actually since the 1970s. And this is for a number of reasons. The first reason is financial. So by calving heifers at 2 rather than 3, you're saving an average £600 per heifer. Not only that, but production is also increased, with heifers which calve at 2 producing more calves and more calf weight over their lifetime. And finally, they also remain in the herd longer. So with all that in mind, it's really disappointing that only an average 35% of UK suckler producers implement the practice. So here is a picture of me in my natural environment. I work for the AHDB in the beef and lamb team and spend many a day talking to producers, particularly on topics relating to suckler production. I've discussed at length with farmers about the benefits of calving at 2, and I think these are widely accepted. However, there are some challenges. Calving at 2 doesn't suit every system and does require additional management if it is to be successful. There are a number of challenges, and they include difficulty getting heifers to reach target breeding weight, perceived increased risk of calving difficulties, and also challenges getting those heifers to calve again once they've calved. In 2019, I was lucky enough to undertake a Nuffield farming scholarship. And the aim of my scholarship was to find out what other countries were doing to minimise these barriers to calving heifers at the first time at 2 years of age. As part of my scholarship, I was lucky enough to travel to Europe, to Canada, to the US, to Mexico, Brazil, Australia, and New Zealand. I would dread to have to try and calculate my carbon emissions for that year. If anyone is interested in applying for a scholarship and would like more information, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I honestly can't recommend it enough. So, unfortunately, the results of my Nuffield are not revolutionary or groundbreaking, unlike many other scholars before me. What I found was the key to calving heifers successfully at 2, excuse me, is just about getting the basics right. And that includes using genetics effectively, selecting hard, and providing adequate nutrition for the heifer's life stage. My talk this afternoon is therefore going to focus on each of these topics. And of course, because this is a breeding conference, genetics will be my primary focus. It seems our primary breeding focus for many years in the UK has been to produce a top quality finishing animal. Top the market is something that most suckler producers dream of, where other farmers will stop and look out over the hedge at your cattle. I'd like to raise the question, is this profitable? It's likely that that big, shapy calf would produce a hard calving, which of course adds cost, not only in terms of if the vet had to be involved, but also for the farmer's time as well. A hard calving, also more often than not, results in a delay in the cow cycling again, which means she won't calve within the next 365 days, which we all know is key to making money in the suckler industry. The calf is then likely to require creep and be fed additional concentrates, which of course all adds cost. Suckler producers in other countries such as the US, Canada, Australia have worked this out. They refuse to just focus on producing an animal the finisher wants, when 2/3 of the cost of producing that animal is attributed to the suckler cow. Professor Bart Lardner, who spoke at the British Cattle Breeders Conference last year, told me when I visited him in Canada that maternal traits are worth 5 times that of terminal traits to the suckler producer. And I must admit, we shouldn't just totally disregard terminal traits when we're breeding our own replacements. However, maternal traits should be priority. One of my first learnings as I set out on my travels was that producers I visited had clear breeding policies and recognised the importance of running functional suckler cows. One of those producers was Jerry Holtman, who ranched 360 beef booster cows in Alberta, Canada. The beef booster is a hybrid consisting of 3 strains, the maternal, the terminal and the heifer. And each breeder focuses purely on one of them. Superior cattle are identified through genomics, and only the top percentage of animals are sold for seed stock. Jerry focuses on breeding cattle for the maternal strain, which is based on 6 traits of economic importance, which are fertility, milking ability, weight, conformation, hardiness, and disposition. By focusing on these traits, Jerry's herd is managing to achieve a 93% conception rate within a 55-day breeding period. Now that Jerry's got his reproduction sorted, he's now focusing on that functional efficiency and is trying to increase back fat in the hope that cows will put more back fat on during the summer months and will use this during the winter, meaning he won't have to feed as much concentrate in the winter. Even though at the moment he did admit to me that he doesn't feed them until the snow gets above their eyeballs. And I think this really demonstrates what can be achieved by using genetics effectively. Yes, I agree. His cattle aren't going to win any fat stock shows, but they are making him money. So previously, I mentioned the term functional female. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, to me, it's a cow that calves unassisted every 365 days and weans a live calf. She also has low maintenance costs, so she's cheap to feed. And she also remains in the herd for at least 5 years, producing at least 3 calves within that time. And that ensures she covers her development costs. And finally, I think it's been suited to the UK system. For example, Jerry is breeding cattle suited to withstand the extreme weather conditions in Canada. We therefore need to think about our cows' suitability. Are they able to convert grass and forage effectively and withstand wet and warm winters? Well, I visited Lee Leachman in Colorado, and he mentioned to me that with the lush grassland available in the UK, fertility should not be a problem here. So then why is it that only on average 85% of suckler cows wean a calf each year? Do we therefore have functional females? I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted, but genetics is the most effective way of ensuring a functional suckler cow is created. However, its utilisation within the industry is disappointing, with only 30% of producers saying they use genetics, which is actually less than the number that weigh their cattle, which is around 42%. When choosing bulls to breed heifers from, the EBVs we should be looking at are calving ease daughters, calving ease direct, age at first calving, scrotal size, mature size and milk. And of course, it's also really important to consider the maternal index. I strongly believe that everyone within the industry has a role to play to ensure uptake of EBVs is increased. I think there's still more work to do to ensure they are more user-friendly. However, we need to keep banging that drum to make sure everyone understands their importance. So most of the EBVs I mentioned on the previous slide will not come as a shock to you, but I just wanted to cover 2 of them in more detail, and they are mature size and milk. So we'll start with mature size first. Prime carcass weight has been increasing at a steady rate of around 2.5 kilos per year. That's probably due to selection for terminal traits. And this has also influenced maternal size, which has also been following that same trend, seen by the purple line on the graph now. The drop in mature weight in the late 90s is due to the over 30-month scheme and BSE. It's really important we don't let our cows get too big. This is because mature weight is highly correlated with maintenance costs, and therefore most producers I visited were looking for a cow which weighed between 550 and 600 kilos. A recent study conducted by AHDB found that the optimum cow size in the UK is 680 kilos. Cows over 700 kilos not only require more feed, but they also require it to be of higher feed quality, which of course increases feed costs at a faster rate. So it's definitely one to watch. A good indicator is to weigh your cows and calves at weaning, and ideally a cow should be weaning 45% of her mature weight. Milk. So milk is really important because it's one of the major roles of the suckler cow to rear a calf. And it seems a dairy cross cow has always been seen as a desirable suckler cow because of their milkiness. However, I must admit, when I was travelling, I didn't see one dairy cross suckler cow because of their high maintenance costs due to their extreme milkiness. And there was also concerns over their fertility and health. Because remember, a dairy cross heifer is likely to be out of a problem cow. I think if in the suckler industry, we can implement a breeding policy to ensure more functional suckler cows are created, which produce adequate amounts of milk. There'll be no need for us to rely on the dairy industry to produce our replacements. So the most effective way to create genetic change within the suckler herd is through careful bull selection, by considering the bull's EBVs and his indexes. However, as we all know, it takes two to tango, so we also need to focus on the dam as well. Unfortunately, in the UK, only a small number of females have accurate EBVs, and therefore we need to use other methods to ensure that only the most functional females in the herd produce our replacements. And this is where data recording really comes in. We should not be retaining heifers from cows which required assistance at calving or calved late in the breeding season. And by late, most producers meant plus 45 days. We also don't want to be keeping heifers from cows which failed to wean a calf or had large teats. I think we've all been there trying to get a calf to suckle it at midnight. It really does bring tears to your eyes. We also don't want to be keeping heifers from cows which failed to wean a calf or weaned a light calf. And by a light calf, I mean one that grew less than a kilo per day. And of course, we also don't want to be keeping any flighty animals. And good records are key here, because any problems at calving can easily be forgotten by weaning time. A producer in Nebraska informed me that if there are any issues at calving, or the cow is deemed unsuitable to produce replacements from, the heifer calf is tagged with an additional red tag. And this notifies the farmer that that heifer is not to be retained. Lots of studies have shown that we are much better off culling unsuitable heifers before the breeding period than we are to try and persevere to get them in calf. Most herds I visited would select heifers pre-breeding on size, temperament and feet and structure. So let's start with size first. Most herds' primary selection criteria was that heifers weighed 65% of their mature weight at 14 months of age. This is because if they've reached that weight, it's likely they have reached puberty and will be cycling. Size is also a great way of selecting heifers which were born at the start of the breeding period, because with being the oldest, they're also likely to be the largest and out of the most fertile cows in the herd. A study by Professor Rick Funston in America found that heifers born in the first 20 days of the calving period had higher weaning weights, pre-breeding weights, and higher pregnancy rates than those born later. The second key selection requirement was temperament. When I was travelling, I was actually lucky enough to go to a bovine reproductive conference in Tennessee. And one of the things that kept coming up time and time again was the influence of temperament on productivity. And a number of scientists found that those flightier heifers reached puberty later and also had reduced conception rates. And flighty cows also weaned lighter calves. So not only is it health and safety risk, but it also reduces production as well. And the final thing was feet and structure. So these heifers on screen now were in Australia, in the Victoria region. And feet and structure is vitally important here because they have to walk a long way for water and feed. And I think it really makes you appreciate how lucky our cows are here. So I hope I've highlighted throughout this presentation just how critical fertility is within the suckle herd. And one of the best ways to select for this is by having a short breeding season. Most of the herds I visited had a 60-day breeding season, and anything not in calf after this time was culled. No ifs, no buts. Some herds would sell those cows and heifers which didn't conceive within the first 45 days of the breeding season. And this is because heifers which calve in the first 3 weeks have higher pregnancy rates, remain in the herd longer, and also produce more calves than those which calve later in the season. One producer who had quite an extreme selection criteria was Dan Kelly, and his heifers are shown on screen now. So Dan runs a herd of 1,200 Simmental Cross Angus suckler cows, and at the end of May, all 500 heifers are synchronised and inseminated to one service. Any barren heifers after this time are culled, and Dan has calculated that he's much more financially better off selling an open heifer in August than he is persevering to get her in calf to sell it later on in the year. And this really highlights the benefits of knowing your costs. But we're only ever going to get good conception rates early in the breeding season if heifers have reached puberty before then. And age at puberty is mainly influenced by genetics and nutrition. Now, I know I'm speaking at a breeding conference, but I think it'd be irresponsible of me to discuss heifer development without mentioning nutrition. Ideally, heifers should reach puberty 2 months before the breeding season, because studies have shown that if they do, conception rates are increased by over 30%. A good indication if heifers have reached puberty is that they are 65% of their mature weight. To achieve this, heifers need to grow at around 1 kilo per day while suckling their mothers, which should be achievable, and then 0.7 kilos per day from weaning through to breeding. And this is probably where we struggle. Often that's during the winter when they're housed in a shed. So make sure you're checking your silage quality and ensuring there's enough feed barrier space for them all to feed at the same time. Don't be afraid of supplementing them. Any additional costs over this time will easily be covered by the additional calf produced. And this photo on screen now was actually in Montana, and this was a heifer development station. And as you can see, they're supplementing these heifers. They'd been brought in, they will be on the ration, AI'd, PD'd, and then turned back out. And nutrition post-breeding is just as important as nutrition pre-breeding, because it has a huge impact on rebreeding success, which, as we remember, is one of the main barriers to calving at 2. Heifers naturally have an extended postpartum interval, which is the time between calving and coming back cycling again. And this is because they have a lot going on. So they require energy for both growth and lactation before they can even start thinking about reproduction again. And the length of that postpartum interval is mainly dictated by nutrition pre-calving rather than post-calving. Ideally, heifers should remain at body condition score 3 from breeding through to second calving. Studies have shown that thin heifers do not calve any easier, but there is a higher chance of calf mortality and lower weaning weights. Remember, the most successful way of achieving calving risk is through genetics. So, if we go back to one of my first slides, which looked at the barriers to calving at 2, I'm hoping that during this presentation, I have explained some of the solutions. The first barrier was reaching target breeding weights. The main focus here is ensuring that we have carefully chosen bulls and females to breed replacements from. We also need to ensure that once they're weaned, we feed them effectively. As one producer told me, you can't starve the profit out of them. The second barrier was calving risk. And this is where careful use of genetic information is key. Use those calving ease EBVs well to ensure calving difficulties are minimised. Culling any cows which consistently require assistance at calving and not retaining any heifers from them is also very worthwhile. And finally, the last barrier was rebreeding success. By selecting for maternal traits, fertility will naturally increase, leading to increased rebreeding rates. And nutrition is also key here. Keep those heifers at body condition score 3 from pre-breeding through to calving. And if those cows look to be losing weight once they've calved, wean the calves early. As long as those calves are 5 to 6 months of age, they won't come to any harm. So I hope this highlights that calving at 2 is possible, but we just need to tweak how we manage our suckler herds. So in summary, calving at 2 can and should be commonplace in the UK. Lots of other countries have shown it can be successfully done and makes real economic sense. If we are to compete on an international scale, then we need to look to reduce our costs, and this is a really good way of doing it. The key to calving at 2 is genetics. Breeding plan with a dedicated heifer development programme. It must focus on maternal traits and use EBVs to assist these key breeding decisions. Selection is also important. Often we think a calf is better than no calf, but to see real improvement, we must cull harshly. Let's get rid of those infertile cows and bring in some fertile, functional heifers. And finally, nutrition is so important. If we don't get this right, the heifer will never be able to express her true genetic potential. And as an industry, let's strive to produce a functional suckle herd, which should lead to increased profitability and hopefully a long-term future for this wonderful industry. Finally, I would just like to thank the Nuffield Farming Scholarships Trust and my sponsors, the Worshipful Company of Butchers and the Yorkshire Agricultural Society, for making this opportunity possible. Never did I think that I would be speaking at the British Cattle Breeders Conference. And thank you to each and every one of you for listening to me today.